If you read the story of the Exodus, it is easy to assume the greatest danger Israel faced was the Egyptian chariot. But an army can be seen. An army can be drowned in a sea. The real danger was much quieter. It was the ground under their feet. It was the wilderness. In Exodus chapter 17, the narrative brings Israel to a place called Rephidim. The text says the entire community traveled from place to place as the Lord commanded, and they set up camp. But there is a detail in the first verse that triggers the crisis. There was no water for the people to drink. We tend to read this as a simple logistics problem. A massive crowd of people, a burning desert sun, and empty water jars. It is a crisis of pure, physical survival. Thirst in the Sinai Peninsula is not an inconvenience. It is terrifying. Within days, the vulnerable would die. The livestock would collapse. But if you look closely at the text, Moses does not treat this as just a water shortage. He treats it as a courtroom. The people surround Moses. They demand water. And Moses responds with a strange question. He says, "Why do you quarrel with me? Why do you put the Lord to the test?" He uses a legal term. This is not just a complaint. It is an accusation. The people are not just saying they are thirsty. Thirst is understandable. God does not condemn people for being thirsty. The problem is what they say next. They ask, "Why did you bring us up out of Egypt to make us and our children and livestock die of thirst?" Notice the shift. They are no longer asking for a solution. They are questioning the motive of God. They are accusing God of premeditated murder. They are saying that the rescue from Egypt was actually a trap. The sea splitting, the bread falling from the sky, the pillar of fire in the night. All of it, they assume, was just a long, cruel setup to let them die in the dust. This is the core of the crisis at Rephidim. It is the moment Israel realizes that freedom does not mean comfort. Freedom means total dependence on God. And total dependence in a barren desert feels exactly like death. The people just left Egypt. Egypt had the Nile River. Egypt had endless, visible, reliable water. It also had whips and chains. But in the panic of the wilderness, the memory of slavery fades, and the memory of water takes over. The tension reaches a breaking point. Moses cries out to God, warning that the people are holding stones. They are ready to execute him. God has to answer. He has to intervene. And this is where the story usually flattens out in our minds. We know the Sunday school version. God is going to do a miracle. Water will come out of a rock. The people will drink, and everyone will move on. But that is not what the text actually does. God does not rain down water from the sky the way he rained down bread. He does not lead them to a hidden oasis. Instead, he gives Moses a set of instructions that seem incredibly strange. He tells Moses to walk ahead of the people. He tells him to take the elders of Israel with him. And then, God tells Moses to take his staff in his hand. Not just any piece of wood. The text specifically reminds us which staff this is. God says, "Take in your hand the staff with which you struck the Nile." It is the staff of judgment, the instrument that brought plagues on the empire of Egypt. God is setting a stage. The elders are the witnesses. The staff is the instrument of divine justice. And the destination is a dry, solid rock. But the most shocking detail is not what Moses is told to do with the staff. The most shocking detail is where God says he will be standing when the staff comes down. When God gives the command in Exodus chapter 17, he says to Moses, "I will stand before you there on the rock at Horeb. Strike the rock, and water will come out of it." That sentence is easy to read quickly, but if you slow down and look at the image it creates, it is one of the most stunning moments in the entire Hebrew Bible. Look at the elements of the scene. Moses is holding the staff. This is not a simple shepherd's crook anymore. God specifically reminded him that this was the staff used to strike the Nile River. It is the instrument of divine judgment. Every time Moses raised that staff in Egypt, the empire fractured. It brought plagues, darkness, and ruin. Standing behind Moses are the elders of Israel. They are acting as witnesses. It is as if a desert courtroom has been convened, and in front of Moses are the people. They are the ones who have put God on trial. They have accused him of malice. They have rebelled against his rescue. By every standard of ancient justice, the people are guilty. The staff of judgment should rightfully fall on them. But God says, "I will stand before you there on the rock." The visible presence of God, The glory that led them out of Egypt in a pillar of cloud and fire descends. It rests on the hard, unyielding granite of Mount Horeb. God places himself exactly where the blow of judgment is supposed to fall. Moses raises the staff. The elders watch in silence. The people wait, and Moses strikes the rock. He strikes the place where God is standing. In a profound and mysterious way, the text presents a God who absorbs the blow. He takes the strike of his own justice. And what happens next is the key to the entire pattern. When the staff struck the Nile River, the water turned to blood, bringing death to the Egyptians. But when the staff strikes the rock where God is standing, the exact opposite happens. The struck rock breaks open, and pure, living water pours out. It is not a trickle. It is a flood in the desert. It is enough water to sustain hundreds of thousands of people and all their livestock. Life flows from the strike. This was never just a logistics problem. It was never merely about fixing a temporary water shortage. It was a visual theology of grace. The people brought their bitterness, their accusations, and their threats of violence. They demanded a verdict. And God, instead of destroying them, took the judgment himself and poured out life. Moses named the place Massa and Meribah. Those ancient words mean testing and quarreling. The names would serve as a permanent memory for the nation. Every time Israel looked back at this moment, they would remember that they tested God, and God answered with unmerited mercy. It was a perfect picture, a flawless demonstration of divine love. The rock became a symbol of a God who provides life when humanity offers only rebellion. You would think this image would settle the issue of trust forever. You would think the pattern of the struck rock would be the end of Israel's fear in the desert. It was not. The wilderness is long. Memories fade quickly in the heat. And almost 40 years later, near the very end of their journey, the exact same crisis happens again. The rivers dry up, the water runs out, the people gather, and the accusations return. But this time, God changes the instructions. He gives Moses a new command, and Moses, exhausted and angry, makes a decision that shatters the pattern and costs him the promised land. The book of Numbers chapter 20 opens in a graveyard. The people of Israel are in the wilderness of Zin. Miriam, the sister of Moses, has just died and been buried. The long, brutal wandering has taken its toll. And then, the water runs out again. Almost 40 years have passed since that first crisis at the rock in Exodus chapter 17. A whole generation has died in the desert. But when the thirst sets in, the children repeat the exact same accusation their parents made. They gather against Moses and Aaron. They say, "Why did you bring the Lord's community into this wilderness, that we and our livestock should die here?" It is an echo from the past. The same panic, the same bitterness, the same accusation that God's rescue was actually a death sentence. Moses and Aaron fall face down at the entrance to the tent of meeting. The glory of the Lord appears to them. But this time, the instructions God gives are subtly, profoundly different. God says, "Take the staff, and you and your brother Aaron gather the assembly together. Speak to that rock before their eyes, and it will pour out its water." Notice the shift. God tells Moses to take the staff, but he specifically tells him not to swing it. He says, "Speak to that rock." Why change the command? Because the pattern was meant to advance. In Exodus, God stood on the rock and took the strike of the staff. The judgment fell. But judgment is not meant to fall twice. The rock had already been struck. The provision of God was already secured. Now, the people did not need another demonstration of judgment. They only needed to ask. They only needed the word to be spoken. But Moses is tired. He is grieving his sister. He is carrying the crushing weight of a rebellious nation, and in his exhaustion, he loses sight of the pattern. Moses takes the staff. He gathers the assembly in front of the rock, but instead of speaking to the rock, he speaks to the people. He shouts, "Listen, you rebels, must we bring you water out of this rock?" He makes it about himself. He turns a moment of divine grace into a moment of human frustration. And then, he raises his hand and strikes the rock with his staff. He strikes it twice. Water gushes out. The people drink. Their livestock drink. God is so faithful that he provides the water even through the broken obedience of his servant. God's grace is not stopped by human failure. But immediately after, God speaks to Moses and Aaron. He delivers a devastating sentence. Because you did not trust me enough to honor me as holy in the sight of the Israelites, you will not bring this community into the land I give them. Moses will die in the wilderness. He will not cross the Jordan River. For centuries, readers have asked why the punishment seems so severe. Was it really just for losing his temper? Was it just for hitting a rock instead of talking to it? It was not just a lapse in patience. Moses shattered the visual theology of God. God was trying to show the people that he was not angry with them. He wanted to show that the waters of life flow freely, simply by speaking, because the strike of judgment had already been absorbed 40 years earlier. By striking the rock in rage, Moses misrepresented the heart of God. He made God look violent and resentful when God was trying to be gracious. Moses failed to treat God as holy. He broke the pattern. But while Moses missed the image in that tragic moment, the rest of Scripture does not. The story of the rock in the wilderness burns itself into the memory of Israel. The psalmists and the prophets take this broken, beautiful history, and they begin to sing about it. They turn the rock into the most important picture of who God really is. Moses did not cross the Jordan River. He died on Mount Nebo, looking out over the land he could not enter. But the memory of what happened in the desert crossed the river with the people. The story of the struck rock was not left behind in the sand. It became a permanent fixture in Israel's imagination. It became the exact lens through which they understood how God handles human rebellion. You can see this clearly in the poetry of Israel. Look at Psalm 78. It is a long, sweeping poem detailing the history of the nation. The writer, Asaph, does not hide the failures of his ancestors. He highlights them. He says the people tested God in their hearts. They demanded food. They spoke against God, questioning if he could truly prepare a table in the wilderness. But right in the middle of their failure, Asaph writes this: He split the rocks in the wilderness and gave them water as abundant as the seas. He brought streams out of a rocky crag and made water flow down like rivers. Notice what the poetry is doing. It is cementing the rock as the ultimate proof of God's unmerited grace. The people provoked him, but the rock still poured out rivers. The water was not a reward for good behavior. It was life given to the undeserving. As centuries passed, something fascinating happened in the Hebrew Bible. The rock stopped being just an object in a historical story. It became a title for God himself. In the Song of Moses, recorded in Deuteronomy chapter 32, God is repeatedly called the rock. Later, in the Psalms, David cries out, "The Lord is my rock, my fortress, and my deliverer." If you grew up around the Bible, you have heard that language so often it has likely become white noise. When we hear the word rock, we immediately think of stability. We think of something heavy, something strong, something that does not move when the storm hits. That is entirely true. But for an ancient Israelite whose ancestors survived the Sinai desert, calling God a rock meant something far more specific. Yes, a rock is stable. Yes, a massive boulder offers crucial shade in a scorching wasteland. But the rock at Horeb was not just a foundation. It was a fountain. Psalm 114 makes this connection explicit. It sings about the Exodus. It remembers the sea parting and the Jordan River turning back. And it ends with this beautiful, startling description of God. It says he is the one who turned the rock into a pool, the hard rock into springs of water. This became the defining biblical portrait of God's character. He is as unbending and permanent as granite. His justice, his truth, and his holiness do not waver. But when his people are dying of thirst, that same unyielding holiness splits open and pours out life. The hardest, most terrifying thing in the desert became the very thing that saved them. For hundreds of years, this is how Israel sang about their past. They gathered at festivals, they sang the Psalms, and they celebrated the water that sustained their ancestors. The rock was their history. It was their anchor. But eventually, the history of Israel grew dark. The kingdom split. The monarchy failed. The city of Jerusalem was besieged. The temple was destroyed, and the people were dragged away into exile in Babylon. They found themselves in a new kind of wilderness. And in that dark season, the prophets realized that the story of the rock was not over. They stopped looking backward. They took the ancient image of the desert, the hard ground, and the gushing water, and they began to use it to talk about a rescue that had not happened yet. When the Babylonian Empire destroyed Jerusalem, The people of Israel were dragged away from their home. They found themselves in a new kind of wilderness. It was not a desert of sand this time. It was a desert of exile. The nation felt dead. The temple was gone. The promises felt broken. But in the middle of this devastation, the prophets began to use the ancient memory of the struck rock to paint a picture of the future. Look at the prophet Isaiah. In Isaiah chapter 43, God speaks to the exiles. He says, "Forget the former things. Do not dwell on the past. See, I am doing a new thing." And what is this new thing? God says, "I am making a way in the wilderness and streams in the wasteland, to give drink to my people, my chosen." Notice what Isaiah is doing. He is pulling the exact imagery of Exodus chapter 17 out of the past and pushing it into the future. But he is scaling it up. The first time, water from the hard rock kept a migrating nation alive. This new time, the water will bring the earth itself back to life. God is promising a new Exodus. Ezekiel takes this image even further. In Ezekiel chapter 47, the prophet receives a vision of a restored temple. But this building has a strange, beautiful feature. There is a small stream of water flowing out from under the threshold of the door. Ezekiel follows the water. An angel measures it. First, it is only ankle deep, then knee deep, then waist deep. Finally, it becomes a massive, uncrossable river. Where is this river going? It flows straight down into the most barren wasteland in the region, eventually emptying into the Dead Sea. The Dead Sea is a place of absolute lifelessness. The salt content is so high that it is toxic. But Ezekiel sees this temple water hit the dead water, and instantly, the sea becomes fresh. Swarms of living creatures appear. Trees grow along the banks, bearing fruit every month, and their leaves bring healing. This was the prophetic vision of water. The rock at Mount Horeb was a true, historical event, but it was also a shadow. It was pointing toward a future river of life that would undo the curse of Eden and reverse the decay of the world. Pause for a second and see what has emerged. So far, this has not been a random set of details. The water began as a miraculous rescue from a rock, then became poetry, and now it has become the ultimate hope of cosmic renewal. For centuries, the Jewish people held tightly to this hope. They eventually returned from exile and rebuilt a smaller temple, but the river of Ezekiel never flowed. The Greek Empire conquered them. Then the Roman Empire. The wilderness of oppression returned, but they did not forget the rock, and they did not forget the prophets. Every year, they celebrated the Feast of Tabernacles. It was a massive, joy-filled festival that remembered how God sustained their ancestors in the desert. And the crowning ritual of this festival was entirely about water. For 7 days, a priest would go down to the pool of Siloam with a golden pitcher. He would fill it with water and march back up to the temple courtyard. The air would shake with the sound of trumpets and singing. The crowds would chant the psalms. The priest would lift the golden pitcher and pour the water out on the altar. It was a visual prayer. They were remembering the rock in the wilderness, but they were also begging God to fulfill the visions of Isaiah and Ezekiel. They were pleading for the living water of the new age to finally arrive. For 7 days, the water was poured. And then came the final day, the greatest day of the feast, the climax of the entire year. The crowds were packed into the temple courts, carrying the weight of centuries of waiting. And it was exactly in that moment, in the middle of that very festival, that Jesus of Nazareth stood up and shattered the silence. The Gospel of John chapter 7 records an event that changes the entire trajectory of the pattern. It is the Feast of Tabernacles. The city of Jerusalem is packed with pilgrims. For a week, the people have been living in temporary shelters, remembering the decades their ancestors spent wandering in the desert. And every day of the festival, they have watched the water ceremony. We have to understand the emotional weight of this moment. The priest walking to the pool of Siloam, the golden pitcher filling with water, the procession back to the temple, the crowds singing the psalms, the water pouring over the altar. This was not just a religious habit. It was a desperate plea. They were remembering the rock at Horeb. They were remembering the thirst at Meribah, but they were also looking forward. They were begging God to split the heavens and pour out the living water that the prophets Isaiah and Ezekiel had promised. They were waiting for the desert of their current exile to bloom again. The Gospel of John tells us that on the last and greatest day of the festival, Jesus is standing in the temple courts. In the ancient world, a rabbi with a message would sit down to teach. Sitting was the posture of authority. But the text says Jesus stands up, and he cries out in a loud voice. He interrupts the liturgy. He shatters the atmosphere of the courtyard. He shouts, "Let anyone who is thirsty come to me and drink. Whoever believes in me, as Scripture has said, rivers of living water will flow from within them." That sounds beautiful to us. It sounds like a gentle spiritual invitation. It is not. In the context of the Feast of Tabernacles, it is an earth-shaking claim. Jesus is hijacking the most sacred visual memory of the Jewish year. He is standing in the middle of a national reenactment of Exodus chapter 17, and he is saying, "I am what you are looking for." He is claiming that the water from the rock was always pointing to him. He is claiming that the river Ezekiel saw flowing from the temple is actually going to flow from his own life. The true source of living water is not a physical stone in the Sinai Peninsula, and it is not a building in Jerusalem. It is a person. The gospel writer makes sure we understand exactly what this means. John adds a crucial note of commentary in verse 39. He writes, "By this he meant the Spirit, whom those who believed in him were later to receive." Up to that time, the Spirit had not been given, since Jesus had not yet been glorified. The pattern is reaching its fullness. The water in the desert sustained physical life for a temporary generation. But Jesus is offering the very presence of God, the Spirit, to sustain eternal life for anyone who comes to him. The crowd that day is divided. Some say he is a prophet. Others say he is the Christ. They argue over where he came from and how he could possibly make a claim like this. Jesus has made the ultimate declaration about the water. He is the fulfillment of the feast. He is the source of the river. But the pattern of the rock does not end in the Gospel of John. A few decades later, the Apostle Paul will write a letter to a church in Corinth. He will want to explain to them how the Old Testament connects to their lives. And to do it, Paul will look back at the Exodus. He will look at the people, the desert, the thirst, and the rock, and he will write a single, staggering sentence that seems to completely break the rules of space, time, and history. The Apostle Paul was a Pharisee. He was trained by the greatest rabbis of his generation. He knew the Hebrew scriptures perfectly, but he also knew the traditions, the stories, and the debates that surrounded the text. And when he writes a letter to the church in Corinth, he uses that training to drop a theological earthquake into the middle of his argument. In 1 Corinthians chapter 10, Paul is warning the church not to repeat the mistakes of ancient Israel. He reminds them of the wilderness. He says that all the ancestors were baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea. They all ate the same spiritual food, the manna that fell from the sky, and they all drank the same spiritual drink. But then, Paul says something that makes biblical scholars stop and stare. He writes, "For they drank from the spiritual rock that accompanied them, and that rock was Christ." Notice that phrase, the rock that accompanied them. Some translations say, the rock that followed them. Where does Paul get this idea? If you read the book of Exodus and the book of Numbers, the text never explicitly says a rock followed the Israelites. But by the 1st century, a massive Jewish tradition had developed. The rabbis read about the miraculous water in Exodus 17. They read about the water 40 years later in Numbers 20, and they asked a very logical question. Where did the millions of gallons of water come from in the 4 decades between those two events? Over time, a legend grew. A rabbinic tradition claimed that the physical rock Moses struck actually traveled with them. It was said to be shaped like a beehive, and it literally rolled through the desert, following the camp of Israel, providing a continuous stream of water wherever they stopped. It was a well-known cultural memory. Everyone in Paul's world would have known the story of the traveling rock. But Paul does something brilliant. He takes this popular legend, and he completely reframes it. He essentially says, yes, something was following them in the wilderness. Yes, there was a continuous, miraculous source of water keeping them alive in the wasteland, but it was not a rolling piece of granite. It was a spiritual rock. It was the actual presence of God. It was the one who stood upon the stone at Horeb. And then Paul names him. He says, and that rock was Christ. This is not just a clever metaphor. Paul is making a massive claim about the nature of Jesus. He is saying that the pre-incarnate Christ was the one sustaining Israel in the desert. Jesus was the presence of God in the wilderness. He was the one providing the water of life to a rebellious and angry people. When Jesus stood up at the Feast of Tabernacles and shouted, "Let anyone who is thirsty come to me and drink," he was not just offering a new philosophical teaching. He was claiming to be the exact same presence that had kept their ancestors alive. He was the rock. But if you follow this pattern to its logical end, a terrifying realization begins to emerge. Paul has just locked Jesus into the imagery of Exodus chapter 17. He has directly identified Christ as the rock of the wilderness, which means we have to look back at the original story one more time. What actually happened to the rock at Mount Horeb? The rock did not just give water because God spoke to it. The rock only gave water because it was struck by the staff of divine judgment. The water of life only flowed because the hard stone was fractured. If the Apostle Paul is right, and Jesus is the true and better rock, then the pattern demands something unthinkable. To provide the living water that will heal the world, the true rock cannot just stand in the temple and teach. The rock has to be struck. If Jesus is the rock of the wilderness, as Paul claims, then the pattern of the Exodus is not just a story of ancient survival. It is a detailed, perfect prophecy of the cross. Think back to the desert courtroom in Exodus chapter 17. The people had put God on trial. They accused him of bringing them out to die. The staff of judgment was raised, but God stood on the solid granite of Horeb and took the blow himself. Now, look at the Gospels. In the first century, God is put on trial again. The religious leaders, the crowds, the Roman Empire, they all gather. They accuse Jesus. They mock him, and they strike him. Jesus is led out of the city to a rocky hill called Golgotha. He is nailed to wood. He is lifted up. He is absorbing the final strike, the judgment for human rebellion, the curse of our long exile, the crushing weight of the wilderness. It all falls on him. He takes the blow of justice so that humanity does not have to. And while hanging on the cross, in the Gospel of John, chapter 19, Jesus says something deeply profound. He says, "I am thirsty." The one who created the oceans, the one who stood in the temple and promised rivers of living water, experiences the terrifying, burning thirst of the desert. He takes the thirst of the wilderness upon himself so that we can drink. And then, he dies. But the pattern requires one final detail. In the desert, when the rock was struck, water broke through to give life to a dying people. The Gospel of John tells us exactly what happened next. To ensure Jesus was dead, a Roman soldier took a spear and pierced his side. He struck the physical body of Jesus. Verse 34 says, bringing a sudden flow of blood and water. That detail is not just medical history. It is biblical theology. John is pointing us back to everything we have seen. He is telling us that Ezekiel's vision has finally come true. The true temple has been opened, and the river of life is flowing out into the wasteland of the world. He is telling us that the Feast of Tabernacles has been fulfilled. The living water is finally poured out, not from a golden pitcher, but from the heart of God. And he is telling us that the rock at Mount Horeb has been struck for the very last time. Remember why Moses was punished in the book of Numbers. He struck the rock twice, but God's pattern designed the rock to be struck only once. The cross is the ultimate, final fulfillment. Christ was struck once, for all time. Now, the living water flows freely to anyone who simply speaks, anyone who asks. The cross is the ultimate Massa and Meribah. Humanity brought its absolute worst. We brought our rebellion, our violence, and our unyielding thirst. And God responded by taking the strike, breaking open, and pouring out a fountain of grace. This is why the image of the rock follows Israel through Scripture. It was never just an isolated miracle. It was the entire story of redemption, hidden in a single event. God does not demand that we find our own water in the desert. He knows we cannot. He simply invites us to drink from the water he provides. The strike has already fallen. The rock has been opened. The river is flowing. If this journey through Scripture has helped you see the Bible with fresh eyes, consider subscribing so you do not miss our next deep dive into the Word. The water in the wilderness was never just a temporary fix for a thirsty crowd. It was the quiet architecture of grace, pointing to the day God himself would be struck for the life of the world.